Hey, well, welcome to Special 201 seminar. We've got our own Leonard Kleinrock here today. He's someone who doesn't need any introduction, but I'll introduce him anyway. He's distinguished professor emeritus in computer science department. He's been in our department for many years. He's considered one of the pioneers of the internet. He developed some of the underlying mathematical theory as a grad student at MIT, and then he went on and his group here had the first node on the ARPANET, which is the anniversary we're celebrating today, 55 years ago, sending the first message over the ARPANET, which later became the internet. And Professor Kleinrock's been honored with many awards for his work. I'll just list a couple, most notably the National Medal of Science, which is a very high honor awarded by the President of the United States, and induction into both the National Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Engineering. And I will let Professor Kleinrock take it from here.
You want to do the thing? Good. Thank you. What do you want? Turn mine out right now? Yeah. There you go.
Awesome. All right, guys, we've got just a quick little video here to set the scene. You may have seen this floating around on social media today. It was made by some of our marketing team. So we got a quick little video. We're going to play that. Professor Kleinrock also has a slightly more exciting video of his that he's going to play, and then we're going to get into the lecture. All right. All right. Professor Kleinrock. Oh, thank you. And then take that.
Let's plug this in. So, good afternoon. Anybody hear me with this? It's working. Great. So, 6 hours from now, the internet began across the street in our laboratory. And when we're done with this lecture, anybody wants to join me, I'll take you over to that room you just saw, and you can actually touch the first router of the internet. And if you're good, you can smell it, because it has a unique smell. But only a few of you can do that. Okay. So, how many of you can actually tell me at what minute and which four square feet the internet began? Well, you just heard it. What's the answer? Belter Hall, 3420, in that room, and I'll show you the four square feet later, at 10:30 at night. So let's go through it. Let's go through basically the underlying internet story. Now, 1969 was a really special year. Some of you may remember some things that happened. For example, put a man on the moon. That's pretty good. A bunch of crazies were dancing around up in New York State, in the Woodstock Festival. An event with probability 0 occurred. The Mets won the World Series. And hopefully the Dodgers are gonna win the series now. 747 took its first flight. Crazy person started killing people here in Los Angeles. And, oh, by the way, the internet was born. And almost nobody noticed, but it probably had the most impact. So let's look at a brief history of the internet. That's what we're going to take you through. How far back do you think somebody was thinking about what we now call the internet? I mean, there was a vision somewhere before the technology occurred. I'm going to give you the quote of a person who was anticipating the internet, and I want you to guess who it was, unless you've seen me give this lecture before. So who made these predictions? It will be possible for a businessman in New York to instantly communicate with his colleague in London or elsewhere, using an inexpensive device no larger than a watch, to instantly deliver any picture, character, drawing, print, text, speech, anywhere in the world. Anybody know who may have said that? Some of you may drive his car. Nikola Tesla. More than 100 years ago. So this idea was there in somebody's mind. He didn't mention video because there was no video then. So, you know, it's not a new thing, but what prevented it from happening? We needed the technology to catch up to that vision, as you'll see in a moment. So there were two parallel threads that led us to the internet. One basically is the theoretical thread, and it began when I entered as a PhD student at MIT in 1959. And the other, and we're going to study that in a moment. You heard the introduction, words about mathematical. You're going to get some math today. So the theoretical thread, we're going to follow that in a moment in more detail than you probably want. The other is the government thread. So let's look at the beginning of the government thread right now. In 1957 and 58, there was something called the International Geophysical Year. Scientists around the globe were going to study our planet. They were going to study the oceans, the atmosphere, the continents, the valleys, the rivers, etc. And they started doing that. Midway through that year, the Russians jumped the gun. It's going too fast. They launched something called Sputnik. How many of you heard of Sputnik? Ah, good. It was the first artificial Earth-orbiting satellite, and the Russians beat us to space. President Eisenhower then said, we're no longer first in technology. We better catch up. So he created what's called the Advanced Research Projects Agency 4 months after Sputnik. And the idea was to bring the United States back up to first place in technology. And how to do it? To fund research, to support education, industrial research labs, businesses, to bring our capability back up. And they started funding in very significant ways across the United States. But the Russians didn't stop. Shortly later, they whacked the moon. Shortly after that, they put the first man in space. Not too long after that, they whacked Venus. And we had done nothing. Finally, as you know, in '69, we put men on the moon. So we were way behind in this period. The question is, what happened? What were we doing in that interval? Well, ARPA, it turns out, played a significant role. We're going to follow that thread later, but let me take you through the theoretical thread first. So, starting my PhD research, I was at MIT, and I decided to find a problem that was interesting and would have impact. And I was surrounded by computers at MIT. And I realized that sooner or later they have to talk to each other. Now, today, computers talk to each other. You may not like what they say, but they do. But there was no such technology to support that. The AT&T voice network was woefully inadequate. It could not support that kind of technology. So here was an interesting problem. It was a fresh one. Nobody was looking at it. An important one. If I could solve it, it would have impact. And I had an approach. That was a perfect problem for research. Now, I suggest you fellas and gals looking for a research problem, think in those terms. Ask yourself the following question. Will my research be remembered 1,000 years from now? Well, that's a pretty big quest. I mean, how much do you remember about things 1,000 years ago that are significant? Not too many, a handful perhaps. How about 100 years? How about 10 years? But if your work is only going to be remembered 3 weeks from now, why spend your entire PhD research career in it? So look for problems that will have some sustainability, some impact, and it'll be around for a while. And it's hard to do. You don't always get that opportunity. Think big. Look outside the box. Okay. So the decade in a glance is the following. I set out to uncover the principles of data networks so that machines could talk to each other. Published a proposal, which is the first mathematical theory on data networks. Analyzed it. Filed a dissertation in '62. Joined the UCLA faculty in '63. You know, that's 61 years ago. It's a long time to be in one place. I've seen things happen here. Telecom industry said, we're totally uninterested in this technology. It won't work. And even if it does work, we want nothing to do with it. That was AT&T talking. They had a big voice network and they were making a lot of money. In 66, coming back to the government thread, ARPA got interested in needing a network for reasons I'll explain shortly. And by 69, we launched the internet here, and that locomotive began. So that's a quick decade. Let's get a little bit of details now. That's my thesis proposal. The title is interesting. Information flow in large communication nets. Why large? Well, two reasons. One, I was working for Claude Shannon, and he believed that when you add a lot of things together, users, throughput, items, you get emergent properties that you wouldn't see in smaller systems. And secondly, I wanted to make sure that emergent properties would be, I didn't want to study a 10-node network. And what would you learn? But if you study a 1,000-node network with interesting topology, things can happen, and they do. That was 1961. This is the opening page of my thesis proposal. And what I say here basically is, we're going to study large networks. We're going to study systems that have nodes, links, they receive, sort, store, transmit, and optimize messages. How long will it take for these things to go through? When will it jam up? What's the optimal capacity to assign? How much storage does it need? What routing procedure should we use? And what's the transient behavior? All the obvious questions for a network, all of them hard. So how to get it forward on that? So the problem, why even study this in the first place? Why wouldn't the AT&T network function, the voice network? And the answer is that voice traffic is very different from data traffic. In voice traffic, you set up a dedicated pipe from me to the back of the room through a bunch of links, and we talk over that sequence. And if I decide to take a cup of coffee, or he decides to go to the restroom, those links are still dedicated to our conversation, and there's no traffic on it. Well, in voice traffic, it's silent about 1/3 of the time, and that's acceptable. That's acceptable. But data traffic is very bursty. Think of yourself sitting on your laptop. You hit a key, it's put together in a pack and goes zip out over a gigabit line. It's gone. By the time you hit the next key, it's an eternity. And most of that bandwidth is sitting there idle. So you can't dedicate a whole sequence of links to a conversation which goes click, click, click. So you need a new way. You need basically a new principle. Couldn't afford to dedicate the pipe. The solution is the following. Share those resources only when there's traffic to send. Don't dedicate them. When somebody comes along and needs it, they get it. If it's busy, they form a queue, perhaps. But the point is you don't want to lock a channel until the data is there, and then you give it. Now, this was already present in time-shared systems of the day. We were sharing basically the capacity of a time-shared processor with many people. They'd submit their jobs. When they were done, somebody else would get a job, etc., in some kind of round-robin fashion. I decided let's use the same principles for allocating the communications resource, the links of a data network. And there's the picture. Those lines are expensive. How to allocate them? Now, the problem with bursty asynchronous demands is the following. They don't want to tell you ahead of time when they need it. They won't tell you how much they need. They almost never need it. But when they want it, I want it now. Well, this is a pretty nasty thing to deal with. So, what kinds of solutions when people behave in that way? Well, there's 4 obvious solutions. Solution number 1, queuing. In queuing, one person gets it and the rest wait. Civilized way to do it. Second way, splitting. Chop the resources into pieces, give a piece to everybody. Third way, blocking. One person gets it, the others lose. Last, smashing. 2 people want it, nobody gets it. That's called Ethernet, by the way, when you think about it. At any rate, so queuing is a civilized way to do it. There's a whole theory behind that. And it's a perfect system for allocating resources, okay? It only serves work that's there. The bakery store clerk will not serve somebody who's around the corner. The customer who's there gets served right now. So it utilizes the resource whenever it's needed and doesn't waste time. So queuing is the right way to approach this. Let's allocate those channels on a demand basis like this. Okay, so let's study this now. I'm going to use a 3-handed approach. My left-hand approach is going to represent the capacity of a channel. My right-hand approach, my right hand is going to represent the throughput, capacity, throughput. And my middle hand is going to represent the response time, how long it takes to get through this damn thing. Okay? Capacity, throughput, response time. Now, suppose I double the capacity, and suppose I double the throughput. What happens to my middle hand, to the response time? You could do one of three things. Go up, stay the same, or go down. How many believe it goes up with these guys? How many believe it stays the same? Sort of equitable. How many believe it goes down? Okay, nobody's a majority here. The answer is it goes down. You double these guys, capacity and throughput, you gain a factor of 2 in response time. Go up by a factor of 1,000, you gain a factor of 1,000 in response time. Now, queuing theorists didn't know that, because how do you speed up a bakery clerk server? That person can work at 1 second per second, but a channel can go from megabit to a gigabit. So you have the ability to scale up the service rate and send more stuff through it, and you gain dramatically. So that was an important representation. And here I'm saying that, I'm going to show it to you now in a moment. The way that these things are compared, capital T is the response time. Rho is the efficiency, or the throughput, if you will. And gamma is the throughput. So I want to trade these things off. Response time, throughput, and the efficiency of using the channel. Now, if you solve that for rho, this is a very complicated solution, I see. You can express rho in terms of T. And let's plot efficiency versus throughput. That yellow line is how the response time behaves. You hold it constant. So what you can get here is constant response time, increasing throughput, increasing efficiency. That's pretty good. But you could do more than that. If you follow the straight line, response time is improving, it's reducing, throughput's increasing on the horizontal axis, and the efficiency is staying constant. That's pretty good. But if you follow this red line, you get all three. You can improve the response time, improve the efficiency, improve the throughput. So you can win in every dimension here if you understand that simple relationship at the top of the screen. That's an important principle to recognize. Well, let's go a little further now. Let's look at a network instead of just a single line. There's an input, a capacity of the network, and a throughput. And the response time, how long to get through this network, how long to get a message through. Let's plot response time versus throughput now. Turns out it typically looks like that. And the question is, where should you operate? You want to operate there? Well, that's terrific in terms of the throughput, but it's lousy in terms of response time. An alternative extreme case is lousy throughput and good response time. So where should you operate? Well, it's a kind of funny trade-off. Well, let's introduce a new metric. We're going to call it power. It's the ratio of throughput to response time. You like power to be big, lots of throughput, little response time. And there's an expression for it. Now, if you sit there, it turns out a line out of the origin has a slope which is exactly 1 over the power. And you want big power, so you want little slope. And in this particular case, that's obtained right at that tangent. Not surprising, that's intuitively pleasing. Line out of the origin, minimum slope, that's the optimum power point. But suppose it looks like that, or even discontinuous. Where can you operate in the green curve to get the minimum slope? And the answer is very simple, right there. So this is a very nice metric which tells you where is the most efficient in terms of power place to operate. Okay. Let's dig deeper now. So now we understand where it goes. It turns out for a simple queuing system, that optimum point tells you that the average number of people in the system is 1. Why? Well, they take a deterministic viewpoint. There's a little queuing system. There's a server. Here's somebody needs service, they start getting served. Now, if more people arrive, they're going to form a queue. Now, queuing is bad in that people waiting in the queue are wasting their time. And if the server's not busy, you're wasting his or her time. So if you look only at the response time in that blue box, if you use your intuition, how should you operate the system? How should you feed people in to get the best everything? Well, the answer is to minimize the response time and maximize the efficiency of the server, put exactly one customer in there all the time. When that customer is finished, stick another one in. Feed one all the time. The server's always busy, that's good. Nobody's wasting time in the queue, even though you threw them outside. So this says, basically, just keep the pipe full, only full, not more than that. So what this says is deterministic reasoning says, put exactly one person in, but you can't because it's a random system. What we saw a moment ago, on average, put one in there. That's what the stochastic told us, the queuing told us that. Which means sometimes there'll be nobody there, too bad, the server's idle. Sometimes there'll be more than one person in there, a little bit of wasted queuing time. But on average, put one, and your deterministic reasoning gave that to you immediately. So that's another way to understand what you want to do here. At the maximum power, you get that. And by the way, at that point, you get basically half the maximum throughput and twice the minimum delay. Okay. Let's look at a general network now. Let's make it a little more extensive. There's the response time of a network. Let's look at the ith channel. It has a traffic of lambda sub I messages per second. Let's look at throughput, gamma messages per second. And let's look at TI, the time you spend waiting for and using that ith channel. Now, in terms of those four numbers I put there, you can give an exact equation for mean response time on a network. It's a very simple, very straightforward equation. You can derive it in 2 lines. And it's exact. No assumptions. I didn't say Poisson. I didn't say independent. I didn't say anything yet. That's an exact equation for the mean response time of a network. So you have to find out how those terms are, how TI operates, etc. Okay, that was published a long time ago. Now let's go a little further. Now we know how to analyze a network to figure out what the response time is. Let's optimize it. Let's assume we have total capacity C to put into this network. And C sub I is how much you put on the ith channel. The optimum solution, how much should go on the ith channel versus everybody else, is given by this equation here. Don't worry how we got it. It's an exact equation. And that tells us that the mean response time is now minimized with the arrow points. So not only can you analyze a network using queuing theory, you can optimize it rather simply in this case. That's how much maximum capacity you should put in. Moreover, I also looked at the situation of when you chop messages into packets and send it through a network, you get an exact solution for how long it takes a packet of a certain length to go through. And it's given there. And that was in 1962. Okay. So I set up the analytic model using queuing theory. I optimized it for capacity topology routing, evaluated distributed adaptive alternate routing, articulated the accompanying principles, and I studied packets. So what are the underlying principles that came out? First of all, resource sharing, demand access. Only assign a resource when you have something to serve. Examples are message switching, polling, asynchronous time division multiplexing, and packet switching. Any one of those will give you dynamic access. Only give it when somebody needs it. What is polling? You need it? Here. You need it? You don't get it. Go next, okay? You need it? You get it. So I don't waste time on the guy who doesn't need it. And it's dynamic. It's another way you can accomplish the efficiency we're talking about. Packet switching happens to be one way in which the internet implemented it. The key is dynamic resource sharing. Only assign it to needs when they arise and not before. Don't waste your time waiting for something to come along. Economy of scale, I showed that before. Bigger is much better. Three-handed argument. And lastly, distributed control. Basically, it's efficient, it's robust, it's scalable, it's stable, it's fault tolerant, and most of all, it works. And it's hard to show that without a simulation because it's very hard to prove how these random routing networks work. Okay. Now, while ARPA grew over that period, started in 58, the research community, I gave you a little glimpse of one of them, the work I was doing, was working already. There were 3 independent efforts. I described one of them, this one here at MIT. Basically, in 61, I submitted my proposal. In early 62, I showed the packet switching and developed a dissertation. There was another work just down the street at Rand Corporation. Paul Barron was working there. He was looking at the structure and the architecture of packet networks. And he did his work here. His main paper was in September 62. He published a bunch of reports in August 64. Then there was a third one in England at the National Physical Laboratory, Donald Davies. He studied a little later. He was looking at, again, the engineering side of it, and he started looking at it there. So this was going on. This is all there in the background. And what's interesting about this? The theory was established before we implemented the damn network. We knew how it should behave before we tossed it out there. That's not the way many systems are developed these days. Build it, throw it out there, how should it work? And maybe try to fix it if it's going to continue to work. Here we knew the theory exactly. Nobody wanted to do it. But finally, ARPA was now poised to take advantage of this theory. So let's bring in that picture now. Here's the government thread, the second thread I talked about. ARPA steps in. In 66, that's basically 8 years after ARPA began, it had been supporting computer research around the country in a number of places. For example, at the University of Utah, they developed excellent graphics. MIT, artificial intelligence. University of Illinois, high-performance computing, etc. And the way they did this, the way ARPA did it, which is beautiful, they'd go to a researcher they knew was good, say Marvin Minsky. And they say, Marvin, here's a pile of money. You're going to have it for a long time. Go do something really great. Shoot for the moon. Try something hard. Failure's okay, and we're not going to watch you. Go do it. And they go around the country to really great researchers and throw money at them. But challenge them to do something important. And what does a Marvin Minsky do with his money? He's being paid by the university. He supports his graduate students with the same thing. Say, graduate student, listen, we need a host-host protocol. Go do it. You want help, I'll try to help you. But organize with your colleagues and your classmates. Make it happen. It's hard. Go figure it out. Failure's okay. Just go for it collectively. What better research environment could you ask for? That ARPA funding culture was key to bringing about the internet that we have today. And just research and the technologies just grew up. So by 1966, there were great systems all over the country. And every time they went to a new researcher would say, buy me a computer. ARPA said, we'll happily buy you a computer. But I want the graphics, I want the AI, I want the high performance from all the other sites here. And ARPA said, we can't afford to give everybody everything, so what should we do? We'll put you in a network. You want graphics, you log on to Utah and use it there. Now, in those days, that was a novel idea. Today, you do it every minute of the day when you reach out to a web-based service. It's in your DNA right now. In those days, that was an important idea, but there was no network. Well, guess what? The technology for making a network is already present. So off it went. So in 66, they committed basically to implementing a network, an early network called the ARPANET, which eventually became the Internet. They brought in one of my classmates, Larry Roberts, to be chief scientist to manage the project. And at this point, the theory and the government threads have merged, ready to make this thing happen. Well, Larry happened to be one of my classmates who knew about my work, and he basically said he's willing to commit himself to spending millions of the government's money because he knows the packets are not going to fall on the floor, because the theory was there to tell him that. So he had the basis and the confidence he could make it work. So finally, my theory could be implemented. Off we go. ARPANET beginning. In 67, ARPA gathered a bunch of us together to write a specification for how industry should supply this network to us. In Christmas time of 68, they gave a contract to a company called Bolt, Beranek, and Newman in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to take our spec, implement it in the form of a mini computer, and deploy this computer around the country, a number of them around the country, and lease lines from AT&T to connect them together. Namely, build a network for us on these specs. And they were told to deliver the first node 8 months from the time they got the contract, over the Labor Day weekend of '69. And basically, UCLA was chosen to be the first node because we had the technology, the understanding, the theory. So now BBN was tasked to deliver a new technology with new users.
I'm not able to change that setting for you.
That wasn't my phone is off. Who's? Oh, my laptop did it. Blame the laptop. The dog ate the can. Okay. Okay, so select to be first node. They had to deliver something with it. New technology, new applications, new users in 8 months. And they delivered it on time, on budget, up and running. You couldn't do that today. No way. Wouldn't happen. Bless BBN did a great job, and they added some good theoretical and implemented ideas. So that was delivered over the Labor Day weekend, early September of '69. 2 months before that, UCLA put out a press release saying, we're going to be the first node of a network. And here's what it looked like. It's a 2-page release. I was interviewed by a guy named Tom Tugend. And at the bottom of this thing is my vision of what the internet would be. And I'm going to read it to you. As of now, computer networks are still in their infancy. There were none. But as they grow up and become more sophisticated, we will probably see the spread of computer utilities, which, like present electric and telephone utilities, will service individual homes and offices across the country. That was my vision. Let's parse it a little bit. Computer utilities, you call that web-based IP services now. Electric and telephone utilities, it's an always-on, invisible technology. I mean, electricity is a wonderful thing. I can't see it here. Probably some over here. That's not even a power outlet. Somewhere there's a power outlet, okay? Say it's right here. It's 2 holes in the wall you plug in, you get electricity. No password, no coding, no tiny screen, no complication. Simple, invisible technology. You don't care how it's generated, it delivers easily. We're not quite there yet. Ubiquitous, individual homes in the country and offices, wherever you go, it'll be available. The thing I totally missed with this vision was, you tell me, what's missed here? That's, well, not the phone, but the social network underneath that phone. Social networks never talked about that. Nobody anticipated that until about 1972 when email came in. And within a couple of months, it took over 75% of the internet traffic. And off it went. And we'll talk about the surprising things that occurred along the way. Okay. September 2nd, the first router appeared at UCLA. October 29th, we sent the first message, and off we go. So what did it look like in '69? Before '69, there's UCLA with a computer that we were running a time-shared service in the computer science department. In September, the first switch arrived. We called it an interface message processor. You call it a router today. There it is. That's the device that's going to handle the routing. That's what it looks like. It looks like a big telephone booth, a refrigerator. You're going to, those who come with me can touch it and smell it, as I said. That's a control panel. It's so ugly inside, it's beautiful. You have to, that's where your internet comes from. That technology, early on, engineers. So, in October, a month later, as scheduled, 350 miles to the north, an organization called Stanford Research Institute received their IMP, connected it to their host, and that line was the first piece of the internet backbone ever, running at the blazing speed of 50,000 bits per second. Why are you smiling? You wouldn't pay a nickel for that today, right? In those days, that was broadband. That was important. Okay. We decided we better keep a log of what's going on. So in early October, one of the graduate students said, we have to keep a record of what's happening in this laboratory. And that's what it looks like. We stole a logbook from the computer guys. This is what students do, imp log. There's a bunch of interesting entries there, but the most important one is this one. On October 29th, 1969, exactly 55 years ago, at 10:30 at night, 6 hours from now, 5.5 hours, Charlie Klein, one of my students, sent a message, wrote down the message, said, talk to SRI, host to host. This is the only record of the first message ever on the internet. We didn't have a camera. We didn't have a voice recorder. It probably wouldn't have worked anyway. That's the only record of it. And the question is, what did it look like? Well, that's the setup we had. We had a computer, a little computer attached to our host computer, to the switch, to the high-speed line, to SRI switch, to SRI's host. And the idea was to log in, send the first message. So the question is, what was that first message? Well, was it really something smart, anticipating a heroic and a timely message? Well, the first telegraph message was really good. Morse in 1844, what hath God wrought? Biblical, powerful, smart. Alexander Graham Bell, 1876, the first message, Watson, come here, I need you. He had spilled some acid on his legs, but anyway. Armstrong, in your lifetime, giant leap for mankind. Those guys were smart. They understood public relations. They understood the press. We were just a bunch of nerds. All we wanted was log in. That's a big message. So type in, you have to type LOG, and the remote machine by that time knows what you're trying to do. It'll type the IN for you. Just log in. Okay. So here's the setup. Charlie's at the bottom. Bill Duval is a program up north, SRI. And to make sure we knew what was going on, we connected them with a telephone line, just so they could talk and see what's happening. You can't see a packet, so, do you see the packet? Now notice, we're using a telephone network to develop a new networking technology which is going to eat the telephone business. And it did. The irony is just too wonderful. So we sent the L. Charlie said, you get the L? Bill said, yep, got the L. Sent the O. You get the O? Yep, got the O. Sent the G. You get the G? Crash. So the first message ever on the internet was low. As in, lo and behold. I added that later, okay? We couldn't have asked for a more prophetic, more profound, more succinct message than that, by accident. And most people don't know that. Most people know a giant leap for mankind. They don't know that, and they should. So it's your job when you come out of here to tell all your friends, all your relatives, your family, what the first message of the internet was. So now you know the answer that I asked you before. When did it occur? October 29th, 1969, at 10:30 at night, at 3420 Belter Hall. The first message was low. You can amaze your friends. You make a lot of money betting with them. Okay. Now it's a documentary. There's a thing by Werner Herzog, the great documentarian, called Lo and Behold. And here's the opening lines of it.
Into this very special place. That machine over there is the first piece of internet equipment. This is a military hardened machine. It has a unique odor, and it was from here that the first message was sent. A revolution began.
So, you'll see that if you like. So let's think about some interesting words. Ethics, trust, open, free, shared. Words you don't hear too often these days. That was the culture of the early internet, as I told you. We were all a bunch of people with a task to do some great engineering research to bring about a revolution. Nobody owned IP. There were no patents. Our reward was you produce a piece of software or hardware and somebody uses it, they say that's great. That's the gratification. There was no ownership. We were all working well and we were tough with each other, but there was no sense of ownership. It was a sense of a joint effort to bring this about. That was very important. If there was all kinds of proprietary issues, it wouldn't have worked. So growing the internet. We were young engineers. We didn't know any better. So we launched an effort to do what had never been done before. We had a model that we analyzed. We knew how it should work, but we're also engineers. And we knew that what we didn't know. So we knew we had to experiment with it, test it, measure it, and revise it. So there's a theoretical side and the engineering side, both of which have to work together to make something like this happen. And as I say, the important part was the way in which ARPA funded this thing, gave us that culture to cooperate easily without a lot of control. You know, it wasn't too many years after this that ARPA changed its funding philosophy and became much more competitive. I mean, when I go to Marvin Minsky, I say, here's a pile of money. That's not democratic. It's not competitive, but it works, okay? And shortly thereafter, there was a Mansfield Amendment and a few others that said, you have to make it competitive, it has to have a military application. There was no military application here. There was a myth going around that says the ARPANET, hence the internet, was created to protect the United States against a nuclear attack by the Russians. It's a myth. It's not true. None of us working down at the level I'm describing had any such commentary or understanding. We were doing a research engineering experiment. However, ARPA was formed within the Department of Defense. And so as you go up the leadership, from the student to the principal investigator professor, to the program manager at ARPA, to the head of ARPA, to the head of DOD, to the president, somewhere along the line, you have to imagine people were saying, this is going to have a great military application. And it did, of course. But that was not the driving force for the people working on it. Okay. So let's look at the growth. From 1969, when it began, there we are, first node, second node, third node, fourth node. All the way to 1988, when it looked like that. And it very quickly crossed the country, by the way. That network grew. It grew rapidly, friendly, broadly, until a Cornell PhD student named Robert Morris let loose a virus. And it knocked out 10% of the computers on the internet at that time. His father said, that's a good thing. It's warning you what might happen. And we said, not true. Not only did we say, we said, just a hacker. What a mistake. This was warning us what could and finally did happen. But we ignored it. His father, at the time, said it's a good thing. We said, what are you talking about? He was right. It was a warning of what could happen. So let's go on now. From 88 to 94, it continued to grow. .coms came online thanks to the National Science Foundation. Al Gore helped build a gigabit backbone. Don't laugh, don't smile. That guy was critical. He knew more about the internet of anybody in Washington, D.C. And his support, he got the first President Bush to sign into law the High Performance Computing and Communications Act of 1991. He created the information superhighway. Gigabit backbone. In addition, the web suddenly appeared in the early 90s. Now we had people who wanted to use this thing, the .coms. We had the capability of strong backbone, and we had a simple user interface, the web graphical user interface. Boy, it began to explode until in 1994, two lawyers introduced the first broad-based spam message. Broad-based, not 10% of the people, broad-based. And we said, and this time we said, ouch. So, I don't know how many of you have ever seen the first spam message ever, broad-based spam message. It hit most of the sites on the web, on the internet. That's it. Happened on April 12th, 1994. They were announcing there's a green card lottery. We're going to help you get into the lottery, but pay us. They were advertising to make money on our engineering research network. How dare they? Stop, cease and desist. Whoa. We sent so much email back to them, we took down their server. So as an unintended consequence of the first spam message, we created the first denial of service attack. That's life. At any rate, that's the way it was. So, but now, the cat was out of the bag. And I'm going to address that in just a moment. First of all, let's look at the people who did all this. They were the early pioneers. You may recognize some of them. They were the implementers. You'll recognize people all along this chart, going down in time now. The value adders, the launchers, and finally the billionaires. Took 20 years to go from idea to making money. Now, a lot of people admire and respect these people in this picture. But Todd. But how important were these pioneers? My point is, not at all. This was going to happen. If none of them had been born, this would have occurred. This vision was in the air. We're just waiting for the technology to catch up. And if you happened to be around at that time, you were lucky. Good, you made it happen. Okay, so it didn't matter who they were. We reached a tipping point, however. We had no patents, no private ownership, as I told you. Nerds basically created technology. But in 1994, it began to change. As I said, the World Web came in, Amazon and Netscape appeared, businesses. So what happened to the internet I knew early on? Well, let's see. This miraculous creation, this wonderful device, which grew an amazing thing, was suddenly hijacked. And what was it doing? Selling detergent. Okay, that's what it had become. 50 million users at the time in 1995. And the commercial world recognized once that spam was out there, they could reach the consumer public. It was a great shopping machine. It was a gossip chamber, entertainment channel, a social club. The internet had become a perfect money-making machine. And it took a big shift in direction now. Instead of doing research and engineering and big challenges, how to make money. How to get the public to go to your site and spend some bucks. And it's unfortunate that happened. So what's happened with the internet? It's gone from nuisance to dangerous. We had the hackers early on. What were they doing? Spam, pornography, pedophilia, worms, viruses. Then it got a little worse. Invasion of privacy, denial of service, destruction of property, identity theft. And now it's really dangerous. We have nation states in the act. We have organized crime across the world. We have fake news, all of that coming along with the AI capabilities. So we have to do something about that. It's not clear what. Let's look at the next phases of the internet. What can we say? It's going to have a nomadic computing. Wherever you go, you'll be accepted. It's going to be everywhere. You can carry devices. Blockchain has come along with distributed technology. Embedded technology coming along. Intelligent software agents. Invisibility is not yet here. I'm going to give you a quote from way back in the early days of the internet. This person said, a user does not understand what is behind the computer screen. Now, you folks do, but most of the people outside don't. And he pointed out, the future is in the art of making it disappear. This fellow said this in September 1999. Making it invisible. Something that I pointed out in my early vision in 1969. It's not yet here. What is invisibility? Okay? The internet should be as simple to use as plugging in to get electricity. Okay? But it's not. When I walk into the room, this room should know I'm here. You should tell me how to fix the microphone. You should fix it for me. You shouldn't need you, Todd. It should provide me with the services I want, with my privileges, my profile, my preferences. When I walk up to a computer, it should take on my characteristics. And it should know what they are. I should be able to interact with it the same way I'm interacting with you. Vision, voice, gestures, haptics, and eventually, hopefully, brain-computer interface. That's not the case. It's too hard. The keyboards are getting tinier. The screens are getting bigger, smaller, whatever, uglier. The protocols, what's my password? How do I do it? How do I make this happen? I should be able to just talk to it, and it should talk back. Not quite there. Coming. So let's invent in the future. We have here at UCLA something called the UCLA Connection Lab. It's at 3440, just a few feet down from 3420, where the internet began. It's used by a number of people, and the person who's administrating it for me is one of your own PhD classmates, Rohit Bhatt, over here. You want to get in, you talk to him. It's here to shape the internet future for collaborative research. Anybody's allowed in. It's interdisciplinary. The underlying theme is connectivity. Notice the name, the UCLA Connection Lab. That sounds very much like the MIT Media Lab. I stole the name. Okay? Now, the Media Lab has an underlying philosophy. The underlying philosophy is designed. That's where their ideas come from. Here, our underlying philosophy is connectivity. But everything is connectivity, so you can't miss. Okay. And these are the kinds of things we look at. And we want to replicate the environment that led to the internet, that kind of open, free, excitable environment. So, in terms of looking at the future now, truly, the infrastructure is easy to predict. Let me give you an example. Nomadic computing was easy to predict. Ubiquitous computing, intelligent software agents, embedded technology, intelligent devices, smart spaces, Internet of Things, virtual augmented reality. These things are coming. They're here and they're beginning to explode. The internet will be a pervasive global nervous system. Everywhere you go, you'll be able to interact with it. You won't see it. It'll be embedded in the world. You can talk to it, like I said. It'll be there. But the applications and services are very hard to predict. Let me give you examples of such that we never predicted. For example, nobody saw email coming. Boom, it came in. World Wide Web took over immediately. Peer-to-peer file sharing, blogs, user-generated content, YouTube, for example. Search engines, important. Shopping engines, social networking, distributed ledgers, blockchain, cryptocurrency, AI, large language models. Nobody saw these things coming. When they came, boy, they took on quickly and they surprised us and they were explosive. Which means we've created a global system which will constantly surprise us. And that's a good thing because there's room for you to surprise us. There's plenty of application services, maybe even underlying technology, which will come along. But that's the challenge. So it's surprising, it's unpredictable, and that's a challenge for you. So we've come a long way. Or have we? So thank you very much. Sure. Question here.
You mentioned that, first of all, thank you for the lecture. I liked it a lot. But you mentioned that your group kind of did it backwards, right? You started with the theory, and you had how the theory worked out before it was implemented. Why was this the path that was taken? Was it just because you didn't have the resources to try it first?
So the question is, why did the theory come before the application and the building of the network? A few reasons. First of all, the world didn't recognize this problem. Just a few scientists around said, look, let's look at this. And doing the theory is a lot easier than building a network. It's expensive. I mean, you can simulate a network, which I did, by the way. So there was some practical aspect to that. But the industry was not ready. Who's going to fund this thing? ARPA didn't see the need initially. In fact, ARPA had just been formed early on. ATT said, no way. I used to go to these conferences called the International Teletraffic Congress, which consisted of telephone engineers and queuing theorists, because they were studying the theory of telephone networks. They had no idea that the queuing theory could be used to design a data network. The knowledge wasn't there. It was much easier. Well, intellectually it was more challenging, but much easier in terms of implementing a theory. So it doesn't happen too often. Question? Come on. Yes?
You said that the project was delivered on time and on budget. You said it wouldn't happen today. Why do you think that happened back then, but it doesn't today?
The reason BBN won the contract from the government is because it was recognized that these guys knew what they were doing. They had come out of the research environment from MIT Lincoln Laboratory. And they weren't in it for making money. This was not a money-making proposition for them. This is a theoretical and engineering challenge. Today, you don't find that out there. For big projects, there's too many government regulations, too much business competition, too much proprietariness, secrecy. BBN didn't take out any patents. They tried to keep the code secret for a month or two until we said you can't. So it was a different mindset. They were like the researchers. They added a lot of good research into it. They had professors working there. They were a company involved with speech recognition. It was a very different environment. It was a better era. Shucks. Someone here had a question? Yes.
Did the theory like line up perfectly with the experiment, or were there parts where you had to like reevaluate?
The question is, nasty question. Did the theory actually match the reality? Did it line up with what was going on? The answer is no. It did not. The exact problem to solve was then and still is unsolvable. You mix in some stochastics with complicated graph theory. And you can show there's too much dependence. So what I had to do was either give up or make an assumption to make it. So I made an assumption, and I made a rather straightforward assumption, which happens to be a false assumption. And I knew it was false, but it didn't matter. Because under that assumption, you could solve the mathematics, and the mathematics was predicting that which actually happened in reality. It was a very fortunate situation. But you're quite right. Theory so seldom, if you pose the exact problem, you're going to run into difficulties. So the trick is to simplify it. I mean, all the great scientists in the world know that. All the names you know from history. Simplify the problem. You know what Einstein said. Make every problem as simple as possible, but no simpler. That takes, good judgment. So you do have to make approximations. And then you have to prove it. And the way I proved it was by the simulation I talked about. I ran my model with and without the assumption on the simulation, and they were exact. Close enough, within a percentage or two. Yes?
So you said one of the qualities of the ARPANET was that it was open. How open do you think the internet is today?
So the question is, the ARPANET then was open. How open is the internet today? Not very. Not very. I mean, you can reach a lot of sites, but there are paywalls. There are giving up certain rights in terms of your privacy. And a lot of sites don't open up exactly what they're doing. They'll keep proprietary exactly what's going on inside. If you're talking about the research environment, that's quite open. You can reach the universities, get access to their most recent publications and the researchers themselves. But if you're talking about the applications and generating new payable technologies, it's much harder these days. And the competition is fierce and dirty and unethical. All those words, ethics, open, free, shared, trusted. Name one that you can apply today to today's world. Probably can't. Oh, yes. Do I think the culture of the internet will change? Do I think or do I hope? You know what my hope is? I'm deeply worried. I'm deeply worried because especially what you see happening in our country today, the fighting, the disagreements are so heavy, it's hard to believe there's going to be an open network again. I can't imagine how that would happen. Now, it can happen in small research environments, local to the environment. But I don't know, Jens, what do you think out there in the business world where you are? I'm with you. He's with me, okay.
Oh, we can't end on such a gloomy note.
Jason, thank you.
Well, okay. Well, I think the connection we have maybe will make a difference.
This is a good question?
Yeah.
Positive?
That's a good question. Come on.
Go ahead.
You mentioned that the internet crashed after the first two. Why did it crash?
I was waiting for somebody to ask that question.
I've always heard it crash, but I never heard why. So.
Okay, so what crashed, first of all, and then why? It wasn't our host computer. It wasn't our switch. It wasn't the high-speed line to SRI. It wasn't the SRI switch. It was the SRI host. So it's their fault. One. Two, what crashed? Turns out, in order to get this, it was set up, the way the timeshare systems work when you were close to them, you hit a key, it goes to the host, and it echoes back to your terminal. One character at a time. We decided to send the GIN, remember L, O, and then GIN, as a triplet. There was a buffer overflow. It couldn't handle the three. It was fixed within minutes, and we finally got the message through. So I'm glad you asked that happy question. See?
All right. Let's thank for us.
Okay.
Final. Thank you.